Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Peter Elbers, the CEO of IndiGo. I want to share with you that we have experienced severe operational disruptions for the past few days.
This is the biggest aviation crisis India has seen in years. In the first week of December 2025, something unbelievable happened. India's largest airline, IndiGo, cancelled over 1,000 flights in 4 days. Thousands of passengers stranded over major airports like Delhi, Bangalore, Hyderabad, and Srinagar. Airfares shot up overnight. People missed weddings, funerals, job interviews, medical emergencies, and the queues stretched for hours. At the same terminals, scenes almost resembled humanitarian relief camps. And the most shocking part, the entire meltdown was not caused by any bad weather or ATC failure or any sudden emergency. It was caused by a rule change that Indigo knew about for almost 2 years but still wasn't prepared for. Today, we are breaking down the full story of Indigo crisis, the regulatory trigger, the massive internal failure, the sheer scale of passenger impact, the controversial government response, and what this means for the future of Indian aviation. Moving on to the first part of this video, what triggered this collapse? The chain reaction began on November 1st, 2025, when Phase 2 of India's revised Flight Duty Time Limitation FDTL rules came into effect. These rules are basically designed to limit the pilot fatigue, which is one of the biggest global safety concern in aviation industry. And they were not sudden at all. They had been announced in January 2024, giving airlines almost 2 full years to prepare. So, what changed on November 1st? Three major restrictions hit Indigo's operation extremely hard. First, the weekly rest. The weekly rest for pilots increased from 36 to 48 hours, which means that the pilot now had to be off duty for at least 48 hours every week, reducing their overall availability. Second, night definition was extended from midnight to 6 a.m. So earlier, early morning flights were not counted as night operations. Under the new rule, pilots operating flights landing anytime between midnight to 6 a.m. would fall under stricter constraints. And Indigo runs hundreds of early morning flights every week, which is a crucial part of its low cost, high utilization business model. The third one, night landings were slashed from 6 to 2 per week. This was the biggest operational shock. A pilot can now perform only 2 night landings per week instead of 6. And this single clause disrupted a large portion of Indigo's network, especially red eye flights and first wave departures. Combined together, these rules significantly reduced Indigo's pool of legally available pilots. But this alone doesn't explain the scale of meltdown. The deeper question is, if the rules apply to every airline, why did Indigo collapse only? The real collapse wasn't the rule change, it was Indigo's poor planning and misjudgment. Moving on to the second part of our video, the underlying failure. According to DGCA, pilot associations, and internal assessments, Indigo was operating with what experts call a lean manpower strategy. In simple words, they didn't hire enough pilots despite knowing the new rules were coming. They were given 2 years to prepare. The revised FDTL rules were announced in January 2024. The phase 1 of this rule was rolled out in July 2024 and phase 2 in November. Plenty of time was given to them to recruit, train, and build buffer capacity. But Indigo didn't. Pilot associations repeatedly warned that Indigo was running on minimal staffing, frozen pay scales, tight rostering, and insufficient crew to manage a high frequency schedule. Before the December meltdown, Indigo had a disastrous November 2025. Almost 1,200 cancellations were done in November. 700 of them were directly related to crew and FDTL constraints. This clearly showed the system was already cracking. There were massive red flags, yet correction action did not come. either from IndiGo or the DGCA. By early December, the situation became catastrophic because the Indigo is too big to fail. I mean, literally, the airline has over 60 to 65% of the market share in domestic aviation, which means when Indigo breaks, the entire system breaks with it. Most airports, slots, connections depend on Indigo's dense network. So even a small disruption creates a ripple effect at a national scale. But this wasn't small. This was thousands of pilots suddenly becoming unavailable under the new rules. The domino effect was immediate. Flight delays, night duty violations, forced cancellations, pilot rest requirements, and even more cancellations. A network collapsed within days. This was not an accident. It was a structural fragility exposed by a regulatory shift. Moving to the third part of this video, the impact on passengers. While the aviation sector debated rules and compliance, India's airports turned into scenes of chaos. Airfares skyrocketed. With thousands of cancelled flights and limited alternatives, fares touched 40,000 plus rupees on key routes like Delhi Mumbai. Budget travelers were completely priced out. Passengers were struck for hours, sometimes overnight, without clear communication. Families slept on floors, business travelers missed crucial meetings, and students might have even missed exams. According to DGCA, passengers experienced severe inconvenience, hardship, and distress nationwide. For a country where millions rely on air travel network every week, this became a national mobility crisis. Moving to the fourth part of our video, the response from government and DGCA. As this crisis unfolded, government had no choice but to intervene. First, DGCA issued a show cause notice to Indigo's CEO. The regulator asked CEO Peter Elbers to explain why Indigo failed to prepare, why adequate arrangements were not made, and why thousands of passengers suffered. The regulator explicitly cited significant lapses in planning, oversight, and resource management. Second, government ordered refunds and fare caps. All refunds for cancelled flights had to be processed by December 7, 2025. Airlines were warned against opportunistic pricing. The government has capped the pricing as per the kilometers. Third, a high level DGCA inquiry panel was formed. A four-member panel was tasked with identifying the root cause, oversight failures, operational deficiencies, and manpower planning issues. The panel have 15 days to submit its finding. Fourth, the most controversial step, temporary suspension of safety rules. To stabilize the system, DGCA took a shocking step. It temporarily rolled back key parts of the new FDTL safety rules only for Indigo. Until February 10, 2026, Indigo was allowed to define night as midnight to 5 a.m. instead of midnight to 6 a.m. Second, to conduct 6 night landings per week instead of two, to count leave as rest, which is normally forbidden. Pilot unions condemned the decision immediately. They warned DGCA's rollback meant pilots could now operate with reduced rest and increased fatigue, directly compromising passenger safety. This raised a serious question about aviation governance. Are safety rules absolute, or can they be diluted when the largest airline struggles? Moving on to the fifth part, Indigo's stabilization roadmap. Indigo issued a public apology and outlined its recovery plan. Flight operations reduced from December 8, crew rosters reworked, internal training and hiring accelerated. CEO projected stabilization in the coming December days. Full recovery projected only after February 10, 2026, when safety waivers expire. This timeline aligns exactly with the temporary FDTL relaxations, indicating Indigo cannot operate its current scale without those waivers. Moving on to the sixth part of this video, what this crisis tells us about Indian aviation and its future. The December 2025 meltdown exposed a deeper systematic problem. India's aviation system relies too heavily on a single dominant carrier. This creates a too big to fail scenario where market cannot function if IndiGo collapses. The regulator cannot enforce strict rule without risking national disruption, and safety standards can be pressured into dilution. Experts warn this is extremely dangerous because it means commercial convenience can override safety, regulatory integrity can be compromised, and passenger bears the final cost every time. The Indigo crisis was not just about pilot shortages or rule changes. It was a stress test for Indian aviation, and the system failed. Indigo failed in planning, DGCA failed in proactive insight, and the government was forced to relax safety rules just to keep the system running. And now the big question is, what matters more, safety or schedule? Should India ever allow FDTL relaxations again? Should large airlines be allowed to dictate regulatory decisions? And has the system learned enough to prevent another crisis? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this breakdown helpful, do consider subscribing for deeper data driven explainers. Thanks a lot. Have a nice day.